The sun was just beginning to set, casting a soft orange light across the small town. In the distance, the woods stretched out like an endless sea of trees, tall and quiet, their branches swaying gently in the evening breeze. Two brothers, full of energy and curiosity, were making their way along a narrow path that wound through the forest. They didn't have much in life, but they had each other and a love for exploring. The woods had always been their playground, a place where they could forget the noise of the world and lose themselves in the sounds of chirping birds, rustling leaves, and the crunch of twigs under their shoes. That day had started out just like any other. Their mother had reminded them not to stay out too late, and their father had given a tired smile before heading off to his evening shift. Life was not easy in their household. Money was always tight, meals were simple, and sometimes there was more worry than comfort, but the love in that small home kept everyone moving forward. The boys didn't complain. They knew their parents did their best, and in their hearts they carried a sense of responsibility, not just for themselves but also for one another. As the boys moved deeper into the woods, laughter followed them. They raced each other between the trees, trying to see who could run faster, who could climb higher, who could throw a rock the farthest. It was their way of escaping the struggles of daily life, turning hardship into games and turning silence into joy. They didn't realize that on this particular day, their adventure would be unlike any other they had ever experienced. It started with a sound. At first it was faint, almost drowned out by the whisper of the wind through the leaves. It wasn't the usual sound of the forest. It wasn't an animal, and it wasn't the hum of insects. It was something softer, weaker, almost desperate. The boys stopped, looking at each other, their playful energy quickly replaced by curiosity. One of them tilted his head, listening more carefully. There it was again, like a voice, cracked and trembling, calling out for help. The two of them froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Fear prickled at the back of their necks. They had been told many times not to wander too far and not to approach strangers. But something inside them told them they couldn't just walk away. Someone out there needed help. Without another word, they followed the sound, moving carefully over roots and rocks, their eyes scanning the ground and the shadows between the trees. After a few minutes, they saw him. An older man lay on the ground, partially hidden by fallen branches and leaves. His clothes were dirty, his face pale, and his leg was pinned under a heavy log that must have fallen during the afternoon wind. He looked exhausted, his eyes half closed. But when he saw the boys, a spark of hope lit up his expression. He tried to speak, his voice hoarse, thanking them just for noticing him. The sight made the boys' hearts race. They were just kids, but in that moment they knew they had to do something. The first instinct was to run home and call their parents. But looking at the man, they realized he didn't have that kind of time. His breathing was shallow and sweat covered his forehead. He needed help right away. The boys exchanged a quick glance, and without speaking, they understood each other. They had to try. Together, they grabbed the branches, pulling and tugging, their small arms straining with effort. The log was heavy, far heavier than anything they had tried to move before. It wouldn't budge at first, but they refused to give up. The older boy braced his shoulder against the wood, while the younger one pushed with all his strength. The man tried to help too, groaning in pain as he shifted slightly. After what felt like forever, the log rolled just enough for the man to free his leg. He gasped in relief, though pain was etched across his face. His ankle was swollen, and he clearly couldn't stand on his own. The boys knelt beside him, asking if he could walk. He shook his head weakly, whispering that he hadn't eaten or drunk anything for hours. He had been trapped all afternoon, and his voice cracked as he spoke. The younger boy quickly reached into his small backpack and pulled out a half-empty water bottle, offering it with both hands. The man drank slowly, tears forming in his eyes. It wasn't just water. It was life to him in that moment. They needed to get him out of there. The older boy crouched down and gestured for the man to lean on his shoulders. It wasn't easy. He was heavy, and every step made him groan. But with the two of them supporting him on either side, they began the slow journey back toward the edge of the forest. The path seemed much longer now, every root and stone a challenge, but the boys didn't stop. They kept telling the man to hold on, that he was going to be okay. It took nearly an hour before they finally reached a clearing near the road. By then the man was trembling, his strength almost gone. They gently lowered him onto the grass and ran as fast as they could to their house, breathless and panicked as they told their mother what had happened. She didn't waste a second. She grabbed her phone and called for help. then hurried with them back to the clearing. Soon the sound of sirens broke the stillness of the night, and paramedics arrived, rushing to care for the man. They lifted him onto a stretcher, wrapping his leg and checking his vitals. The boys stood quietly nearby, hearts pounding, their clothes dirty and their faces smeared with sweat. The man looked at them one last time before being placed into the ambulance. He reached out a shaky hand, gripping the older boy's fingers for a moment. His lips curved into the faintest smile as he whispered, "Thank you." And then the doors closed and the ambulance drove away, red lights flashing against the trees. Back at home, their mother hugged them tightly, scolding them gently for the danger but unable to hide the pride in her eyes. Their father came rushing in from work when he heard the story, looking at his sons with amazement. They had done something extraordinary, something far beyond their years. Yet to the boys, it didn't feel like heroism. It just felt like the right thing to do. That night, as they lay in bed, the younger one asked quietly if the man would be okay. The older one whispered back that he believed he would. They didn't know his name, didn't know who he really was, but deep down they felt a connection, as though fate had brought them into the woods at just the right time. Little did they know, this encounter was only the beginning of a story that would change their lives forever. The days after the rescue were quiet, almost ordinary, but a quiet tension hung in the air, like something unseen was moving around their small town. The boys returned to school carrying their backpacks and lunchboxes, trying to act normal. But in the hallways and on the playground, whispers followed them wherever they went. "Did you hear about the boys in the forest?" They saved someone. Some of the older kids looked impressed, some skeptical, but everyone was talking. It was strange for them because they hadn't done it for attention. They had just helped someone who needed it. Their mother tried to keep things calm at home. She made extra food, asking them to sit down and eat, reminding them not to get too caught up in the stories people were spreading. "What matters," she said softly, "is that you did the right thing. That's all that counts." But she couldn't hide the pride in her eyes. Their father nodded in agreement, ruffling the older boy's hair as he left for work one morning. "You've got hearts bigger than most grown men," he said quietly. The boys smiled but didn't respond. They were still thinking about the man in the forest, the one they had helped carry out. They didn't know his name and they didn't know who he really was, but the memory of his face stayed with them. The way he had looked at them when he whispered thank you, the way his hands trembled when he took the water. They couldn't forget it. They wondered if he was okay. They wondered if anyone else would know how much he had depended on them. Every time they walked past the edge of the woods, a little voice inside told them that something bigger than themselves had just begun. Meanwhile, across town, the man they had saved was recovering in a quiet, spacious home, surrounded by people who cared for him but didn't understand the full story. He was wealthy, more than anyone in the town could imagine. A billionaire who had spent most of his life in business meetings, boardrooms, and private jets. He had grown accustomed to people doing things for him. But the way those two boys had run straight into the woods, risking their own safety for a stranger, had shaken him in a way no money ever could. For days, he could not stop thinking about them. He asked his assistant to look into the small town near the forest, to try and find any record of the boys who had saved him. It wasn't easy. They were just children, from a neighborhood nobody paid much attention to, but slowly, piece by piece, he learned their story. Every detail made him more certain that he needed to repay their courage, though he knew money alone could not express the gratitude he felt. It was something deeper, a need to connect, to acknowledge the humanity that had saved his life. Back in the town, life carried on for the boys. They went to school, helped at home, and spent afternoons playing in the yard or exploring the woods again, though this time with a quiet respect for its dangers. Their friends began asking questions, curious about what it had been like. "Was he scary?" one asked. "Did he say anything?" Another friend was amazed they had carried a grown man all the way out of the forest. The boys answered simply, shrugging and saying it had felt normal. They didn't boast, but they didn't hide it either. The truth was that they were proud in their own quiet way of what they had done. At home, the phone rang one evening. Their mother answered, surprised to hear a polite, formal voice asking to speak to the boys. The voice said very little about who they were at first, only that someone wanted to personally thank them for their bravery. The boys listened in disbelief as the voice explained that the man they had helped was recovering and wanted to meet them. to understand more about who they were, and to express his gratitude. The boys looked at each other wide-eyed, their hearts racing. It was surreal. They had only expected a simple thank you, not a direct invitation to meet someone they didn't even know was important. Their parents were cautious. They had heard stories about wealthy people and promises that sounded too good to be true. But the sincerity in the voice convinced them. They agreed to a meeting, arranging a time that was safe and convenient. When the day finally came, the boys dressed in their best clothes, nervous and excited. They had no idea what to expect, but they knew it was important to be themselves. They didn't have to pretend to be anything other than who they were, two brave boys who had done the right thing in a moment of need. The meeting was held in a quiet park, a neutral place where no one felt out of place. The man was waiting, seated on a bench, looking smaller than the boys had imagined. He smiled gently as they approached, his voice calm and kind. "I want to thank you again," he said simply. "You saved my life and I will never forget it." The boys shuffled their feet, unsure how to respond. It was strange to hear someone so important speak to them as equals, without arrogance or distance. He asked them about school, their family, what they liked to do, showing genuine interest in their lives. It was a conversation unlike any they had ever had. As they talked, the boys realized that the man wasn't just wealthy. He was thoughtful, kind, and attentive. He asked questions about their neighborhood, about what they hoped for in the future, and listened carefully when they spoke. The conversation moved naturally, like talking to someone who cared not because they were being watched, but because it truly mattered to them. The boys felt a connection growing, one that was not based on money or power, but on respect and shared humanity. Over the next few days, the man continued to inquire about their lives. He sent small notes of thanks through his assistant, asking if there was anything they needed, not as a gift, but as an acknowledgement of their courage. He wanted to do more, but he understood that trust and familiarity had to come first. The boys began to feel comfortable sharing stories about their day-to-day life, about school projects, chores, and dreams they held quietly. It was strange, realizing someone so important wanted to know about ordinary things, and yet it made them feel valued in a way they hadn't experienced before. Meanwhile, the neighborhood began to buzz quietly with rumors. People had seen the man walking through the streets asking about the two boys, and curiosity grew. The boys remained humble, never bragging or exaggerating. They knew they had done something extraordinary, but they also knew it had been simple. Someone needed help, and they had given it. That truth, they realized, mattered more than attention or recognition. Days turned into a week, and the boys' lives remained mostly normal, but the undercurrent of change was there. They could sense it in the way people looked at them, in the quiet pride of their parents, and in the occasional note or message from the man they had saved. Something was coming, something bigger than themselves. And though they couldn't see it yet, they felt it in the air like a promise. One evening, the boys sat together on the porch steps, watching the sky turn from orange to deep blue. The forest lay in the distance, quiet and mysterious, and they thought about the day they had ventured in, the moment they had found him, and how quickly their lives had shifted without warning. They didn't speak much, but they didn't need to. The bond between them and the sense of having done something meaningful was enough. They understood that bravery didn't always come with applause. Sometimes it came quietly, in the knowledge that they had made a difference. Little did they know, the man was already planning something that would astonish them, something that would bridge the gap between their small lives and the world he inhabited. He wasn't looking for headlines, nor did he want to make a spectacle. He simply wanted to honor their courage in a way that was meaningful, a way that reflected the heart behind their actions. And as the boys drifted to sleep that night, unaware of what was coming, the first steps toward a life-changing connection were quietly unfolding. Days passed quietly in the small town, but the air was filled with a sense of anticipation that only the boys seemed to feel in the deepest corners of their hearts. School carried on as usual, and the neighborhood's daily rhythm continued, with people going about their work, children playing in the streets, and shopkeepers calling out greetings to familiar faces. Yet something extraordinary was about to unfold, and it would change the boys' lives in a way they could never have imagined. It began on a bright morning when the boys were outside, tossing a worn-out soccer ball back and forth in their yard. The sun reflected off the windows of the modest houses around them, casting long shadows that danced over the pavement. Birds chirped from the trees lining the streets, and the smell of fresh bread from a nearby bakery floated through the air. The boys laughed and competed to see who could kick the ball farther, neither of them noticing the sleek black SUV rolling slowly down the street, its tinted windows reflecting the sunlight. The vehicle came to a sudden stop right in front of their home, drawing the attention of neighbors who paused in their daily routines to watch. A hush fell over the street as the large doors opened and a man stepped out, his posture calm yet commanding. Even from a distance there was something different about him, a quiet confidence, a presence that seemed to make people instinctively respectful. The boys stopped mid-laugh, their soccer ball bouncing harmlessly away, and stared at the man. They had seen cars before, even expensive ones, but this was unlike anything they had ever witnessed. Their mother, who had been watering the small garden near the porch, froze for a moment before hurrying toward the man, her hands trembling slightly. The boy's father appeared at the door, wiping his hands on a rag from fixing a pipe earlier, squinting at the stranger. "Can I help you?" he asked cautiously, his tone polite but wary. The man smiled warmly, his eyes scanning the family before settling on the two boys. "I believe I can," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "I've come to thank these young men personally for something very important." The boys exchanged glances, hearts racing, unsure of what to expect. They had no idea that the man standing before them was the very person they had rescued from the woods days earlier. To them, he was just a stranger now approaching their home. But as he spoke, there was a sincerity that couldn't be ignored, a quiet intensity that suggested this meeting was more than a simple thank you. The man crouched slightly to be at their level, and the older boy instinctively stepped forward, protective yet curious. "You saved my life," the man said, addressing them directly. His tone was steady, yet there was an undercurrent of emotion that the boys could sense, even if they didn't fully understand it. The younger boy looked up, wide-eyed, still processing the scene unfolding before him. There were no cameras, no reporters, no fans, just the three of them standing together in the late morning sunlight. A quiet acknowledgement of courage and human kindness. Their mother guided them to sit on the porch steps, while the man remained standing for a moment, giving the family space but not leaving his focus on the boys. "I know that what you did was not for reward," he said. "You acted out of instinct and kindness, but I want you to know that your bravery did not go unnoticed. It made a difference in my life, and I will never forget it." The boys shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to respond. They had expected a simple thank you, perhaps a handshake, but not this calm, personal conversation. The man's presence seemed to fill the yard with a quiet gravity, making even the chirping birds sound distant. The older boy spoke first, his voice soft but steady. We just did what anyone would do," he said, looking down at his shoes. "We didn't expect anything in return." The man nodded as though he had anticipated the answer. "I understand," he said. "And that is exactly why this matters so much. In a world where so many act out of self-interest, your actions remind me that courage and compassion still exist. I want to show you that your bravery can have consequences far beyond what you can imagine." For a moment, silence hung in the air. Neighbors who had gathered discreetly at a distance whispered among themselves, astonished at the scene. They had seen the boy's courage in the woods, and now they were witnessing the man's appreciation firsthand. It was a moment that no one would forget, a rare encounter that bridged worlds, the ordinary and the extraordinary. The man motioned for the boys to stand and led them inside his SUV. The boys hesitated at first, unsure if they should, but the gentle encouragement from their mother reassured them. Once inside, the interior of the vehicle was unlike anything they had experienced. Leather seats, polished surfaces, and a quiet sense of elegance surrounded them. Yet the man remained approachable, speaking to them with the same warmth he had shown outside. As the SUV drove through the town, the boys noticed that their familiar streets looked different from this perspective. The neighborhoods they knew so well seemed smaller somehow, and the simple rhythm of daily life felt both comforting and fragile. The man asked questions along the way, not about business or wealth, but about their lives, their family, their school, and their dreams. The boys answered honestly, surprised by his genuine curiosity. For once, they felt that their voices mattered, that the story of their ordinary lives was worthy of attention. The SUV eventually arrived at a nearby park, a quiet space with tall trees, a small pond, and benches that invited reflection. The man asked the boys to step out and walk with him. They did so cautiously, still unsure of what would come next. He gestured to a small bench near the water, and they all sat, taking in the calm environment. The sunlight reflected off the surface of the pond, shimmering like gold, and the boys felt an unfamiliar sense of peace, as though this meeting was meant to ground them in something bigger than themselves. "Do you remember the moment in the woods?" the man asked gently. The boys nodded, their memories vivid. The fear, the struggle, the urgency to help someone they didn't know. "That moment," he continued, "showed me what true courage looks like. Not the kind that seeks attention, but the kind that acts when it matters most, even if no one is watching." The boys shifted uncomfortably, feeling a mix of pride and humility. They had never thought of themselves as heroes, just as kids doing what felt right. Over the next few hours, the man shared stories of his own life, not as a billionaire or a powerful figure, but as someone who had faced challenges, doubts and loneliness despite his success. He spoke of the pressure to always appear strong, to always be in control, and how easy it was to lose sight of what truly matters. The boys listened intently, fascinated by the honesty in his words. It was unlike any conversation they had ever had, and it left an impression they would carry with them forever. As the day went on, the man asked if there was anything the boys needed, anything that could make life a little easier or more joyful for them. At first they were hesitant, unsure if they should ask for anything. Their mother reminded them gently that it was okay to accept help when offered sincerely. Slowly they shared small things, books for school, supplies they needed for projects, and even some simple comforts for their home. The man listened carefully, noting each request and promising to see it fulfilled. When it was finally time to leave, the SUV carried them back home, the boys quietly absorbing everything that had happened. Their hearts were full, their minds buzzing with excitement and disbelief. They had never imagined that helping a stranger could lead to such a connection, such recognition and such care. The man gave them a warm smile as they stepped out of the car, his eyes reflecting both gratitude and respect. "This is only the beginning," he said. "There is more to come. But for now, know that what you did matters beyond measure." Back in their yard, the boys' parents hugged them tightly, relieved that everything had gone safely. Neighbors who had observed the day's events from a distance whispered among themselves, realizing that the boys' courage had attracted someone extraordinary into their lives. That evening, as the sun set behind the rooftops, the boys sat together quietly, reflecting on what had happened. They didn't fully understand the scope of the day's events, but they could feel the shift in their lives. The world felt bigger, more connected, and somehow more hopeful. Over the next few days, small gestures began to arrive, packages with school supplies, notes of encouragement, and even invitations to experiences the boys had never imagined. Each one reinforced a lesson that the man had quietly shared, that courage, kindness, and humanity were the true measures of a person, not wealth or status. And in the hearts of the two boys, the memory of the woods, the struggle, and the life they had saved remained the anchor. A reminder that their actions had consequences far beyond what they could see. As the nights grew longer, the boys would sometimes sit on the porch steps, looking toward the forest and thinking about the man they had helped. They wondered what he was doing, whether he was well, and how he remembered them. Little did they know, the bond that had formed that day was only beginning to grow, and the world they knew, the familiar streets, the simple routines, the quiet lives, was about to expand in ways they could never have imagined. The days after the SUV visit were filled with a mix of excitement and quiet anticipation for the boys and their family. Life at home carried on in the same rhythm as always, but now there was an invisible thread running through their days, a sense that something larger was approaching, something that could change their lives in ways they had never imagined. The boys still went to school, still helped with chores, and still played in the yard after homework. But the knowledge that someone important knew about them, someone whose life they had saved, lingered in their minds with a strange, almost magical weight. The first morning after the visit, the boys woke up early, energized and nervous. Their mother was preparing breakfast, humming softly as she moved around the small kitchen, and their father sipped tea at the table, quiet but smiling. "You two have been through something special," he said, glancing at them over the rim of his cup. "Remember, it's not about what comes next, but about who you are. Always be true to yourselves." The boys nodded, taking in his words. They were proud, but not in a boastful way. They understood that courage and kindness weren't meant to be flaunted. They were a quiet strength that grew inside a person. Later that morning, a car pulled up in front of the house again. It wasn't the large black SUV this time, but a smaller vehicle, clean and neat, carrying a package addressed to the boys. Their mother opened it carefully, revealing a set of books, art supplies, and notebooks, all things the boys had mentioned wanting for school and projects. There was also a handwritten note inside, simple but heartfelt. Your courage reminds me that the world can be better when people act with kindness. Keep learning, keep growing, and know that what you did matters. The boys stared at it in awe, hardly able to believe that someone they had barely known would think so deeply about them. As the day went on, the boys could hardly focus on schoolwork. Their minds wandered to the man they had saved, to the way he had spoken to them, to the strange feeling that their small actions had created ripples far beyond their neighborhood. Their friends noticed their distraction. "Are you thinking about that man?" one asked quietly during lunch. The boys only nodded, shrugging slightly. It was hard to explain. How could they describe the strange mixture of pride, fear, curiosity, and excitement that now filled their hearts? It was a feeling unlike anything they had ever known. After school, they returned home to find the man waiting in the driveway. This time he had brought someone with him, a young assistant who helped coordinate the small gestures he wanted to make for the family. The boys' parents were cautious yet polite, welcoming the man into their home. He spoke with the same gentle tone as before, asking how they had been, how school was going, and how their family was managing daily life. The boys answered honestly, realizing that the man's interest in their lives was not superficial. He wanted to know the truth, not just a polished version of it. He invited the boys to join him on a small trip to a nearby museum. They had never been inside such a place before. The exhibits were full of paintings, sculptures, and artifacts from around the world. The boys wandered slowly, their eyes wide with wonder, absorbing everything they could. The man spoke to them not as a wealthy figure showing off, but as someone who wanted them to experience knowledge, beauty, and history. He explained the stories behind the art, the struggles of the people who created it, and the lessons that could be learned from each piece. The boys listened attentively, fascinated by his stories and by the way he made learning feel alive and exciting. At one point, they stopped in front of a painting depicting a small child helping an injured traveler. The man smiled as he looked at them. "Do you see this?" he asked. "Sometimes the smallest acts of courage can change lives, even if the world never notices. That is what you did, and that is why I am here today. Not to reward you with things, but to show you the value of who you are and what you can do." The boys felt a lump in their throats. They had never thought of themselves as heroes, and yet in this quiet moment, they understood that their actions had made a difference far beyond what they had imagined. After leaving the museum, the man took the boys and their parents to a small cafe. It was cozy, with sunlight streaming through large windows and the smell of fresh pastries in the air. They sat together talking about their lives, dreams, and hopes for the future. The man listened carefully, encouraging the boys to share their ambitions no matter how small they seemed. He explained that wealth and success were not just about money or power, but about the opportunities to make a positive impact on others. The boys absorbed every word, realizing that the world was bigger than their neighborhood, but also that they had the power to influence it in meaningful ways. When they returned home, the boys' neighbors had gathered quietly in the street, curious about the day's events. Whispers filled the air as people speculated about the man's visits, his intentions, and the boys' bravery. The family had always been known for their quiet life, and now they were at the center of a story that everyone wanted to understand. Yet the boys remained humble. They didn't boast or exaggerate. They simply shared their experiences with honesty and simplicity, letting their actions speak louder than words. Over the next few days, small but meaningful changes began to appear in their lives. The man arranged for additional support for their school, helping provide resources that allowed them to explore their talents more fully. Books, art supplies, and educational tools arrived, each accompanied by a note encouraging the boys to pursue their interests and never lose their curiosity. He also helped their parents with practical things, fixing small repairs around the house, providing opportunities for the father's work, and ensuring the mother had time to focus on her health and well-being. These gestures were not flashy or extravagant. They were thoughtful, deliberate, and designed to show care rather than impress. The boys' confidence began to grow. They approached schoolwork with renewed energy, explored new hobbies, and shared what they were learning with their friends. They realized that their small act of bravery in the woods had opened doors to experiences they could never have imagined. More importantly, they understood the value of kindness and courage, lessons that no amount of wealth could ever teach. Each day they reflected on the man's words, the museum trip, the cafe visit, and the quiet ways he had shown appreciation. It was a connection that transcended material gifts. It was a bond built on respect, trust, and shared humanity. One evening, as the family sat together on the porch, the older boy spoke quietly. "Do you think he will always be part of our lives?" The younger boy nodded slowly. "I think so. He cares about us and we care about him. It's like he's part of our story now." Their mother smiled, brushing a strand of hair from the younger boy's face. "Remember," she said gently, "it's not about how often you see someone, but about the way they leave a mark on your heart. That is what matters most." The man continued to visit over the following weeks, not to show off wealth, but to share experiences, knowledge, and support. He invited the boys to meet people who could mentor them, introduce them to new ideas, and encourage them to dream bigger than they ever had before. Each visit reinforced a single truth: that bravery, kindness, and compassion could open doors in ways that no one could predict. And for the boys, each moment was a lesson in growing up with integrity, humility, and a sense of purpose. As the days turned into weeks, the neighborhood began to notice subtle changes in the family's life. Their home looked brighter, their school performance improved, and the boys carried themselves with a quiet confidence that drew respect from friends and neighbors alike. Yet the family remained grounded, never losing sight of the values that had guided them before the man had entered their lives. They understood that opportunities were meaningful only when paired with gratitude, humility, and continued effort. One afternoon, the man invited the boys and their parents to a small gathering at a community center. He wanted to celebrate courage, kindness, and the power of ordinary people to make a difference. Local families, teachers, and friends attended, eager to hear the story of the two boys who had saved a life in the forest. The boys felt nervous as they stood before the crowd, unsure of what to say. The man encouraged them to speak from their hearts, to share their experiences honestly. They did, describing the fear, the struggle, and the simple decision to help someone in need. The audience listened quietly, moved by the sincerity and courage of the two boys. By the end of the day, the family returned home exhausted but filled with a deep sense of fulfillment. The man's gestures had not only improved their material situation, but had also strengthened their sense of identity, purpose, and belonging. They realized that the forest rescue had been only the beginning. What had followed, the kindness, guidance, and support of someone who recognized their courage, was shaping a future filled with possibilities they had never dared to imagine. That night, as the boys lay in bed, they reflected on everything that had happened. The man, the visits, the small gifts, the museum trip, the community gathering. It all felt like a dream. But it was real. And more importantly, it was a reminder that one small act of bravery could create ripples that extended far beyond what they could see. The days that followed felt different for the boys, as though the world itself had shifted in ways they could not fully see. Life at home continued in its usual rhythm: the smell of breakfast in the kitchen, the quiet clatter of dishes, the soft conversations between mother and father. But now there was an underlying sense of change. Something had happened that was bigger than themselves, bigger than their neighborhood, and yet it began with the simplest of acts: stepping into the forest to help a man in need. The man they had saved continued to visit, but now the visits carried more meaning than before. He didn't just come to deliver gifts or words of thanks. He came to share experiences, opportunities, and guidance that would shape the boys' lives in profound ways. One morning he arrived with a plan. "I want to show you something," he said gently, his eyes warm and patient. "Not for reward, not for recognition, but so you can understand the power of kindness and the doors it can open." The boys followed him, their hearts pounding with curiosity and excitement. He took them to a small workshop in a nearby city. It wasn't large or flashy, but it was a place where ideas came to life. Young people worked together on projects, solving problems, building inventions, and creating solutions for challenges in the world. The boys' eyes widened as they walked through the space, seeing kids like themselves engaged, focused, and full of energy. The man explained that these were young people who had been given opportunities to develop their talents, and now they were using those gifts to make a difference. The boys felt a spark ignite within them. They realized that their own courage had opened a door that could now lead to something extraordinary. For the next few hours, the man encouraged them to participate in small activities. They tried their hand at simple experiments, observed designs being built, and even sketched ideas of their own. Each attempt was met with encouragement, not criticism. The boys began to understand that learning was not just about following instructions or memorizing facts. It was about curiosity, creativity, and the willingness to try, even when failure was possible. The man watched them carefully, occasionally offering advice or guidance, but mostly giving them space to explore. It was a lesson far beyond what school had ever taught them. Afterward, they walked through a quiet garden near the workshop. The man spoke softly. Courage is not just a moment in time. It is something that grows, that influences the choices you make every day. You have already shown it, and now you have the chance to carry it forward in everything you do. The boys listened intently. They had saved a life once, but now they were beginning to see that bravery could take many forms. Helping someone struggling at school, supporting a friend, or even pursuing their own dreams despite obstacles. The weeks turned into months, and the man's guidance continued. He arranged small scholarships for the boys, opportunities to attend workshops and mentorship sessions with professionals who inspired them. He also helped their parents in ways that were thoughtful and lasting, improving their home, assisting with work opportunities, and providing stability that had long been missing. It was not just wealth that was being shared, but knowledge, care, and the understanding that their lives mattered. Through all of this, the boys remained humble. They never bragged about the gifts, the trips, or the attention they received. They carried themselves with a quiet confidence, knowing that their actions had earned the respect of someone extraordinary, but also understanding that true bravery and kindness were measured in deeds, not recognition. Their parents were proud, but even more so, they were grateful that their children were learning lessons that no school could teach, lessons about courage, integrity, and the power of human connection. One day, the man invited them to a large gathering, a celebration of courage and humanity. People from different parts of the city came, teachers, community leaders, young people, and families. The boys stood quietly at first, overwhelmed by the crowd, unsure of how to act. But the man guided them gently to the front, encouraging them to share their story. With a deep breath, they began, speaking honestly about the day in the forest, the fear, the struggle, and the simple decision to help someone in need. As they spoke, the audience listened in silence, many with tears in their eyes. The story of two ordinary boys who had acted with extraordinary courage resonated deeply, showing that heroism often comes in small, unexpected ways. After the event, the man took them aside. "Do you see?" he asked softly. "The world is full of challenges, but it is also full of people who are ready to help, to support, and to listen. Your actions remind others of that truth, and that is a powerful thing." The boys nodded, their hearts full, understanding for the first time that their courage had not only saved a life, but had inspired many others. As the boys grew, the connection with the man deepened. He continued to mentor them, encouraging them to pursue education, develop talents, and dream without limits. He introduced them to people who could guide them, helped them gain experiences that expanded their horizons, and quietly reminded them to stay grounded and humble. Over time, the boys began to understand that the rescue in the forest had been a turning point, a single act that had created opportunities, friendships, and experiences far beyond what they had imagined. Life in their neighborhood also began to shift. The community took notice of the boys' growth, the opportunities they were receiving, and the quiet ways their family had been supported. People began to see that courage and kindness were valuable, not just in extraordinary moments but in everyday life. The boys, despite their fame in the small town, continued to act with humility and care, helping neighbors, tutoring younger children, and sharing what they had learned. Their actions became a ripple, inspiring others to act with integrity and compassion. Years passed, and the boys' paths began to unfold in ways that were remarkable but grounded in the lessons they had learned. They pursued education, explored careers that aligned with their passions, and continued to act with courage and kindness in their daily lives. The man remained a mentor and friend, always present but never overwhelming, providing guidance and wisdom when needed. The bond that had formed in the forest, strengthened through shared experiences, gestures of support, and the recognition of character, became a lifelong connection that neither distance nor time could break. One day, many years later, the boys returned to the forest where it all began. The trees stood tall, the sunlight filtered gently through the branches, and the sounds of birds and rustling leaves filled the air. They stood silently, reflecting on the journey from that first day, the fear, the struggle, the rescue, and the extraordinary chain of events that followed. It was a moment of quiet reflection, a reminder that even the smallest acts of courage can create waves that change lives forever. As they walked through the woods, the memory of the man's face and his words came back to them. Courage is something that grows, that influences the choices you make every day. They realized that they had carried that courage forward, not just for themselves, but for others. Their lives had been transformed, not only by the opportunities they had received, but by the understanding that bravery, kindness, and compassion were the true measures of a person. The story of the boys and the man spread beyond their town, reaching people far and wide. Media outlets shared the tale, emphasizing the courage of ordinary children, the impact of selfless acts, and the power of human connection. But the boys never let it change who they were. They remained humble, grounded, and committed to the values that had guided them from the very beginning. Fame, recognition, or wealth never defined them. Their identity was shaped by choices, actions, and the willingness to step forward when it mattered most. In the end, the man who had once been a stranger became more than a mentor or a benefactor. He became part of their extended family, a presence that reminded them of the extraordinary potential in ordinary acts. The boys had saved a life once, but that life had returned the favor in countless ways, providing guidance, opportunities, and lessons that would resonate throughout their entire lives. As the sun set on the forest that evening, casting long shadows over the familiar path, the boys stood together, looking at the place where it had all begun. They understood something profound, that courage is not measured in grand gestures alone, but in the quiet choices we make, the kindness we show, and the strength we summon in moments of fear. And in that moment, surrounded by the forest, they felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that their story, one of bravery, kindness, and human connection, was only the beginning of a life filled with purpose, hope, and endless possibilities.